In 1977, Atari released the Video Computer System, which later became known as the 2600. This game console holds a seminal place in so many of our lives, as it led to us later discovering personal computers and then holding careers in the technology industry, myself included. So today we're going to take a look at 10 things you didn't know about the Atari 2600. It's coming up right now on the Retro Hack Shack. All right, I have to apologize because we're not just going to be covering 10 things you didn't know about the Atari 2600, but perhaps up to 13 things you didn't know. I found a little bit of bonus material and I had to throw it in here. But I figure for most of you, you know a few of these things already, and maybe it'll even out to around 10 things you didn't know or didn't fully know about this great system. So this idea started for me when I discovered a playlist of a recording of a meeting that took place on the 20th anniversary of the Atari 2600 back in the 90s. So I was fascinated just watching all of these interviews with people as they recounted how the 2600, or the video computer system as it was known back then, came to be, with people like Nolan Bushnell, Joe DeCurr, and lots of people like that that worked and loved working on this system back in the days when it was first coming to market. And I was surprised that these videos hadn't been seen by more people. A lot of them had 1,000 views or less. So today I thought I'd walk through some of the things that I learned watching those videos. Some of them are refreshers for me, some of them I was not aware of, and I thought I would share them with all of you as well. The nice thing about this is you'll be hearing from the people themselves, not me interpreting something I read on Wikipedia, but actual recorded video from the people as they recounted their experiences with the Atari VCS 2600. Another resource I relied on for this video is the book Atari Inc. Business is Fun by Marty Goldberg and the late great Kurt Vendel, who dedicated so much of his life to preserving Atari history. If you don't have this book, I'd highly recommend you pick it up. It goes into great detail, especially about the early days of Atari, and draws from actual interviews with the actual people that were there. This will be a video mostly about some of the things that happened around bringing the system to market. I've also uncovered a bunch of facts around how games works, more around the technology and how it works. If you want to see 10 things you didn't know about the technology behind the Atari 2600, let me know in the comments below and I'll do another one. Things such as, why do some of the games have little black lines on the edges? Or why is there flicker in Pac-Man? If you want to know some of those technical facts, let me know, and I'll do another 10 things you didn't know episode. But for now, let's go ahead and start out with number 1. All right, this first one goes back to a little bit before the 2600 came into fruition, or the design on it started anyway, and that is that Atari's original name wasn't Atari at all. It was something called Syzygy.
The original company's name was Syzygy, and we got that out of the dictionary, and we just thought it was cool. Of course, we were techies and engineers, and the fact that nobody could pronounce it or spell it didn't seem to bother us. People called us Syzygy and Syzygy, and we thought that it was great. The alignment of planets in a gravitational field, you know, and all that sort of stuff. But it turned out when we went to incorporate, we started out as just a partnership. It was already taken by a candle maker in Mendocino. So we had to choose something else. Atari was on the list, and we got the name from the game of Go, which we were playing at the time. And it's a Japanese game, and if I'm about to take a group of your stones, I say Atari, which is sort of like polite warning that you were going to be engulfed. And I thought that was a great, aggressive name for a company.
I don't know about you, but I can't imagine if we were playing the Syzygy video computer system that it would have been as successful as it had become. Maybe, who knows? Contrary to what many people might believe, Atari wasn't the first cartridge-based video game system. That honor belongs to another system known as the Fairchild Channel F.
Or also somebody else had done a bad job of a cartridge-based game.
A full cartridge game. It was
Yeah.
the one where
Oh,
all
yeah,
the games
dedicated.
were in it, but they program it so
The
it looked like
Coleco
it was
thing
a cartridge.
looked like a cartridge machine, but it had these little triangle things that clipped in. They were actually dedicated chips
Right.
with the I/O stuck in the box.
Right,
Precisely.
right. And then I think after
Stank.
we started the project, Fairchild had come out with the Channel F. Actually, they had picked up a product from some other vendor, but it didn't have terribly good games. It wasn't a great architecture.
And maybe the worst controller I'd ever seen.
Yes.
Yeah, they picked it up from Alpex.
Yes, who actually wound up with a patent that had some great value later on that some attorney stumbled over and sued a lot of guys over the cartridge-based system, but that's a sidelight.
Some people might be surprised to learn that Nolan Bushnell actually sold Atari to Warner on October 1st, 1976, before the Atari VCS was even released. It turned out that he needed cash to pay the bills, and venture capitalists in those days weren't interested in backing a video game system. So he turned to Warner, they bought him out, but he did stay on for a few years after that to manage things and make sure things were running smoothly.
Atari grew without venture capital. We didn't have a penny of venture capital until we were about 40 million in sales. And so as a result, we were constantly out of money because we were, collecting money and paying. And I literally sweat every payroll because, you'd say, do we have enough money in the bank for payroll? The answer was no. And I actually think that I wouldn't have sold Atari if I'd have just taken a vacation. But I was tired. It was a fight, it was a struggle, and all of a sudden somebody comes along and offers you more money than you ever thought you were going to be worth, and you say, why not?
So you may have heard that the code name for the Atari VCS was Stella, but do you know where that name actually originated? It wasn't somebody's girlfriend at all. It was actually named after Joe Decoeur's bike. He had a French bike which was named Stella. He used the name Stella as his password to some of the off-site code development systems that they were using. Then that got brought in as the name of the TIA, which got renamed later because people thought Stella was such a cool name, they wanted to give the system the code name Stella.
So we got a time-sharing account on a commercial computer to do cross-assembly. So we could actually not have to calculate the addresses ourselves for the ROM code. So I got one of these TI terminals that had cassettes in it. And I would key in my source code, record it on cassette, then I would upload it to the time-sharing service, it would assemble it, I would download it to a second cassette, and then I would load it into the hardware. Okay, so they said, you need a password. Password, what do I use, right? So I'm sitting there in my office next to my bicycle. It's an obscure French bicycle called Stella. So I think, Stella, fine, I'll use that for my password. Jay said, that's a cool name. I'll name the project, or the chip that. And Bob Brown, his boss, said, that's a cool name. Let's name the project that. So Jay renamed the chip TIA. Then marketing up at Atari thought, oh, they're naming products after women now. And so everything thereafter was named after a woman, not knowing it was really could have been like Raleigh and Schwinn instead of Colleen and Paula.
Yeah.
So let's see.
Now we had a question for you, Joe. Do you still have your Stella bicycle?
Yes, I still ride it.
Really? You
Yeah.
still ride it?
And I haven't repainted it yet because it's got, I keep thinking I need to take a photograph of this thing for posterity before either it gets crashed or somebody steals it or something.
The Atari VCS or 2600 only has 128 bytes, that's right, bytes, of memory available to it inside the console. Later systems, like most famously the Commodore 64, had 64 kilobytes of memory, and other systems had increasingly more and more memory as time went on. However, at the time that they were developing the VCS, they had to keep costs down. They were developing this at a price point so that they could send it over to Sears and have them distribute it. That meant they had to keep the cost down to between $25 and $30. And that wasn't the only cost compromise they made.
The fortunate thing is that we had no budget for putting in hardware, and that really focuses you pretty quickly.
Makes a lot of decisions.
So as Ron said, the advantage was that since we couldn't put in a lot of hardware to help the programmer, we ended up putting in something that didn't have a lot of hardware that got in the programmer's way.
Right. If
And
you
you know,
can't fix it, call it a
it's
feature.
really a minimalist design. I mean, you know, look at that. That's really nicely done. And you know, it was really I think a tour de force of simplicity for functionality, which allowed cost structures, which allowed the business model to work.
If you'd like to improve your business model with low-cost PCBs, components, and assembly, look no further than today's sponsor, PCBWay. Not only does PCBWay provide PCB manufacturing, CNC milling, and 3D printing, but they also have a project page. And if we go check that out, you'll see that they have a multitude of projects that are submitted from the community, and these are voted up by you. And you can find these all on the project page. And look what we have here, a Raspberry Pi Pico ZX Spectrum microdrive hardware emulator. And you know I'm going to be getting that project so that I can feature it here on the Retro Hack Shack. And on the project page, they also have a store where you can buy all sorts of tools and modules to help you with your retro tinkering. So check out the projects page at PCBWay, and I thank them for their support of the Retro Hack Shack. During the early life cycle of the VCS, Atari made agreements with chip manufacturers to keep competitors at bay. Often, chipset manufacturers would approach companies trying to sell them a new chipset that they had developed, which could be used to make a new game system. Well, Atari would actually lock up some of those chip manufacturers by making agreements with them on purpose just to keep competitors from getting their hands on something which could become a problem for Atari.
Well, you know, all the time we used to do a lot of misdirection to our competition.
Right, because we couldn't keep a secret. So
Exactly.
we figured we put misdirection out and they couldn't tell whether we were lying or not.
I remember the very first block diagram that you wrote on this, it said consumer game, but then we erased that and we put computer dating game in case it fell into the wrong hands. Nobody would know what this, you know, brilliant bit of the future was about.
You know, almost all of those competing products that started coming out in 82, 81, I had those things tied up because everybody wanted to sell us their chip. And so I had exclusives on I knew that the only places that could compete with us would be N-channel fab capacities and people that could design to it. So I had contracts with every one of those in which I had exclusives. But I kept fooling around saying, change this and change that, and all that. When I left, Kassar said, what an idiot this Bushnell is. We can't use all these different systems. They didn't realize that I was just keeping everybody else frozen out, and he canceled every one of the contracts. So for the saving of less than $150,000 a year, he ceded all the other companies, because the minute those contracts were canceled, one went to Coleco, another one went to Mattel, another one went down to TI, and it was all part. I mean, did you ever stop to question why there were no real competition to the 2600? You always got to play a little bit of offensive, a little bit defensive, and then you got to play with people's minds a little bit. And it was a thing where if any of those guys would have gotten their act together, I had it, and it didn't matter.
If you're finding some of these things interesting, I'd appreciate a thumbs up for the channel. It would really help me out and spread the word, so thanks. The Atari VCS was just $1.25 away from being a much more capable system. Again, they were designing this to a price point and they had to cut costs where they can. And at that point, they didn't think that the system was going to last more than a few years, so they cut costs where they could.
We're talking about how the cartridges got constrained. And that was driven by a couple of things. The first one was really that we had constrained the system in other ways. It saved us $1 approximately to go from the full 40-pin 6502 to what we call the 6507. As part of that, we threw away some address lines. And then we're sitting in discussions with the people who made these connectors, and they made one that was 24 pins, and they made one that was 30 pins, and so on. And it saved us, you know, a quarter or something to go to the smaller connector. We had a failure of imagination. We didn't expect to put RAM in the cartridge because RAM was very expensive. So we thought, okay, our reference designs, the tank can be in 2K, the Video Olympics can be in 2K, maybe we'll need 4K, but that's fine. So it didn't occur to us to put the read-write line out there,
Phase 2.
or the clock wires, or extra address lines. You know, nowadays we can smack ourselves in the head and think, oh, why didn't we do that? Actually, we were smacking ourselves in the head by the summer of 1978, but it was too late already. We had established a market standard for ourselves, and we were bound to it.
Eventually, the developers figured out how to do bank switching so that they could switch back and forth between ROM chips inside the cartridges, so they could put more information in the cartridges and increase their size from 2K to 4K and later 8K and beyond. The original plans for the Atari VCS called for it only to support between 20 to 25 games, and the original lifespan was only estimated to be between 2 and 3 years.
So I remember one meeting that we had, and it was around the conference room in my office in Moscatus, because I can remember the place.
On Lark Avenue.
On Lark Avenue, where we were talking about how many different game cartridges we could produce. Because I was trying to calculate what the end of life
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
You were having
product
fun
was.
with this business model.
I remember
I
the
was
list.
having fun with the business. Well, I felt that we were going to
Somebody
be
had
able
to
to
do
ship
that.
that thing for maybe 2 years.
Right, 2 or 3
And maybe
years.
3 if we
Right.
could get it over.
Right, but I remember the first number was like 2025 would be great if we had that many cartridges.
No, that was Pong. That was 20 or 25.
Cartridges for the VCS. If we
But
could
2
get that many out, that
2
would be
years
great.
in the game business is forever. Coin-op games were every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, so 2 years.
Yeah, but come on, we knew the cycles for the consumer
Yeah.
was tedious, so you had your fundamental kind of a 9-month cycle.
It was a year sort of to tee it up,
Yeah.
and then a year to really make a lot of money.
Right.
And at that time, I felt we had to
in a
come
year
up
to
with
eat inventory. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
that was left on the shelf.
The Atari VCS, of course, lasted way longer than that. It was discontinued in January of 1992, so longer than anyone ever expected. And to date, there's been over 524 games created for it, but that list continues to grow because users keep developing more and more games for this beloved system. The Atari VCS actually contained one of the first screensavers. As you can see here, in order to prevent burn-in on televisions, which was a fear at the time, they actually created this multi-mode system where it would change colors randomly over and over again to prevent CRT burn-in.
Unbeknownst to us, did some study that video games were burning the phosphorus on TVs, but this was only in stores. This created very negative publicity at one point. There was a cassette to audio tape that I've still got. There was a gag commercial where it was Joe and Nolan's discount video game house, and it went along the lines of God put phosphorus on this earth to be burnt. But it was a big issue. So we all of a sudden, midway through the design, we had to, with Joe and Larry and Jay, had to fix this. So I said, okay, you know, when you're not being played, just have the color lookup table to cycle through all the bits. And that was something, was that in software or hardware?
Software.
And that produced it through every single game, and it just solved the problem once and for all. So
Right.
the average light value was
So this
0.
was the first screensaver.
The Magnavox Odyssey was a system that was released before Atari released many of their home Pong systems, and the Magnavox Odyssey had a game that was very much like Pong. So Magnavox sued Atari, and Atari was forced to settle with them. Part of the agreement that came out of that lawsuit was that Magnavox would actually get to own any of the IP or use any of the IP that Atari developed up to a certain time period. So what did Atari do with the VCS? They delayed it. They kept it under wraps until they were able to show it off in the summer of 1977.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
we were more or less 2 years start to finish. You guys started this thing in the late part of 75, right? And by the late part of 77, it was in production.
It would have been shipping sooner had it not been for the Magnavox lawsuit. We had an agreement, this bizarre deal, mistake that Magnavox made, where we agreed to settle a suit, and they had rights to own any product that we shipped from 1 year after
Oh,
the
that's
signing,
right.
which was signed just before the CES in Chicago. And I'll assume I'll give you credit for having the wisdom to decide it before the show, because we knew that we could show anything we wanted at the 77 CES, but anything we showed before then would be their property, arguably. So it was the only product we kept quiet about. That was the only time we ever did. And it wound up making the 77 CES even that more exciting, because nobody expected it. And we basically showed the industry at that show, and I think we were all there at that show, we had changed the industry.
As you can imagine, many companies wanted to get in on the home video game and home computer craze, and Texas Instruments was one of those. They actually tried to recruit Joe DeCur to come work for them, but in a turn of events, he actually fed them a little bit of misinformation, which guided them down the wrong path and got them into trouble with the FCC.
But the other point that I remember now about being fun to work at, because really you couldn't recruit any of our guys because it was just too much fun. But TI tried to recruit you. Remember that?
Yeah.
And they sent you down there, and we realized what was going on, and there was this big FCC war going on. So we said, Joe, tell them this story of how you can snooker the FCC because the rules are miswritten, and they did. And TI went that way. It was wonderful.
I was being innocent. I had this idea that, well, if we wanted to evade the FCC Part 15 intense rules and have to build an aluminum case around them inside the
Our
computer,
brains.
I wanted to use fiber optics to isolate.
Because you read the rules, and in reading the rules, this would be illegal.
It looked like it made sense. So TI people came and they talked to me about it, and their eyes popped open, and then they went away.
And you came to me.
Then Wade Tuma said, no, it won't work. Came to you too. But they went and did it anyway. And the FCC bit them. And then Wade came to my office and said, boy, if you'd been trying to sabotage those guys, you could hardly have done a better job.
This next one is a little controversial because some people have said it happened, some people have said it's not. We're going to hear from the people themselves as part of that 20th anniversary reunion and see what they have to say. But the story goes that a man sued Atari because the original box, the first one produced for the Atari VCS, had a chess piece as one of the icons on the cover of the box. Well, there was no chess initially for the VCS, and so the story goes that a man from Florida sued Atari because there was no chess game and actually won and got a certain amount of money. But later on, the Atari developers actually did make a chess game that was actually able to run on the VCS.
Well, I can remember when I first heard that it could play chess, I said, no way. Don't waste your money.
No way. No,
the real story.
That simple. Because Larry thought he could do a good chess game. We didn't know how to put it on the screen yet, but we had the algorithm to play a good chess game. And it was Bob
But
White.
get it on the screen.
Now let's back up. The first box came out, had a picture of a chess game on it.
Oh.
Right. And some guy in Florida sued us
Well, yeah.
because we didn't have a chess game. He won. We had to refund his money and give him another $500 for his aggravation because there was no chess game. And we at the time said, yeah, well, there's no way we're ever going to do a chess game. And then 2 years later, Larry and Bob ended up making a chess game on the system that we never thought would be possible.
Now, in my research, I couldn't find anyone that claims to have actually found this lawsuit from this mystery person in Florida. It could be that someone just called up and threatened to sue, and so maybe Atari gave the person some money, and then marketing at that point decided that they better change the icons on the box just to prevent further legal action, because they also changed several other icons. In fact, 6 of the original icons that were on the original box, which shipped with the Atari VCS, were changed in a later version. Last but not least, the Amiga is actually the spiritual grandchild, if you will, of the Atari VCS or 2600. It turns out that the folks who actually worked on the board for the 2600, Jay Miner, Joe DeCur, and others, actually went on to work on the Atari 8-bit line of computers. And originally they thought that was going to be a much more capable game system, which would be a follow-up to the 2600. They shifted gears and turned it into a home computer. A few years after that, they actually got back together again, this time not to work for Atari, but to work on their own for a company called Amiga, which made joysticks. They were going to make the next version of their game system, and it eventually became the Amiga that Commodore bought and turned into the Amiga we all know and love.
You know, Jay Miner got together with Dave Morris and some other people. I had a company that I was trying to fund. So the other guys went off and did that work, and I worked as a consultant for Amiga. I was badge number 3, basically. Did the system architecture and the giant timing diagrams and basically the architecture design and the detail for the Agnes chip, which was our third system. And because Atari wasn't interested and Commodore wasn't interested. And so that was an attempt to recreate what Atari should have done.
Yeah, well, that's why I left
exactly.
I left Activision to do Amiga for just that reason. We were sitting at Activision, there was no hardware system. I said, well, if no one's gonna do it, I'll do it. And that's why I went off to talk to Jay at the semiconductor company and said, let's do a new game system. And actually, they were interested.
All right, so how many of those 13 things did you know about Atari? I'm sure you knew a few, and I know there's people out there that probably knew most of those, but I found it incredibly fun to watch this series on YouTube. I'll put a link to the playlist down below. There's interviews with all of the original Atari folks, plus a lot of the people that went on to found Activision and the other game companies like Imagic that came after that first round of developers left Atari. Super fun to hear both the history and the technology and what they had to deal with as they were trying to get games to work on this system, which, to be honest, had its hands tied behind its back, so to speak, because of some of the initial decisions that were made in developing the board. But they actually pulled off some really crazy stunts to get some of the games that we know and love from our childhood on the Atari VCS. What's your favorite memory of the Atari 2600, or perhaps a fact that I didn't capture here, because there are many of them? Put those in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And like I said, I'll consider doing a part 2, if you want me to, about some interesting trivia around the technology that made the Atari VCS possible. Until then, consider subscribing to the channel so you get notified when my episodes come out, or become a patron and support the channel that way. Patrons get early access to my content. They also get extra commentary at the end of my episodes and bonus material. So I appreciate all of their support, and their names will be coming up in the credits at the end of the episode. Until next time, thanks for watching. Patrons receive ad-free and early access to content after the episode commentary, and of course, your name in the credits. If you liked that episode, here's a few more you might enjoy, and I thank you for your support.
End of line.